Christians, make Egypt great again. This is part 7 of my little mini series on what happened with the new king of Egypt when Joseph died and when Jacob and all the 70 that came with him from Israel to Egypt, when they all died, and when the people of that generation in general died, including the person who was Pharaoh at the time over Joseph. We find out in Exodus chapter 1 that a new Pharaoh came into town, one who did not know Joseph. And we see this in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. And I already went through the first several verses, but now come to verse 11. And verse 11 happens right after what we read in 8 and 9, where it says this new king of Egypt who didn't know Joseph came on the scene. And it says that he said to his people, to the other Egyptians, look at the people of Israel. They are more and mightier than we are. This was a problem for the new king. And he wanted to create a stir and animosity between the Egyptians and Israel, which he became and proved to be successful at doing, getting the people to fight against each other and to have angst against each other. So he tells his people to look at Israel and look at them, see how big they're getting. And we got to do something about this because we can't have them overtaking us, because otherwise they might join our enemies in any future attack against us. So then he says to them, come, let us deal shrewdly with them so that they don't multiply. In other words, let's stop their growth. Let's figure out a way for us to be able to restrict their growth in numbers so that they cease from multiplying. But then, so the first measure that he takes, the first policy, as it were, in modern terms, the first policy was to tell his Egyptian people to set taskmasters over Israel to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, which was Pithom and Ramesses. So this is what this king is doing now, this new king. This is what he's doing to make Egypt great again. He convinced his own people to turn against Israel. Up to this point, they had been friendly with one another and cohabitated in Egypt together. And Israel was restricted to their area, which was called Goshen. And it was there where they grew, and they were shepherds. They weren't warlike people. They were shepherds. And yet, the new king of Egypt had been successful at getting Egyptians to consider the Israelites as a threat. So he started going after them. So he says, we need to come up with a plan. So in Exodus 1, verse 11, it says, therefore, they did set over Israel, the Israelites, taskmasters for the sole reason of afflicting them with their burdens. Now, we need to understand what is meant by taskmasters, because even in the movies where we see the Exodus taking place, and when people teach this, we always talk about taskmasters, but very little is conveyed to understand what they really are and what they do. Because they're not just taskmasters like slave lords. This is not what they are. What they are, taskmaster is another expression for tax gatherers. These taskmasters were tax gatherers. That was their role, to gather taxes. They were also called masters of burdens. A taskmaster was a master of burdens. So here's what you have in this whole idea of what a taskmaster is, what an Egyptian taskmaster is. They create burdens that they impose on people that they are then able to collect more taxes when the burdens aren't delivered. So these taskmasters were given the guideline to go and increase burdens on the people of Israel, and then tax them for their delivery and increase their taxes for a non-delivery or a delivery that is short on what is expected. So the taskmasters, they were tax gatherers and masters of burdens. Create burdens that increase tax gathering. And if you make the burdens impossible enough, then you keep the Israelites from ever going out of debt. So they were these guys, these taskmasters, these tax gatherers, they were essentially imposers of these onerous burdens with one goal: to prevent the Israelites to pay impossible tributes back to the state. And when it says that, therefore they did set them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, there is referring to the Egyptians, their burdens. In other words, burdens that they would create and then to put on the Israelites. And that's what is spoken about. So to afflict here means to, well, let me give you an example. In Genesis 15, verse 3, it says this: "And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs," which would be Egypt. "And they shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. So when we read afflict in Ephesians 1:11, when it says, "Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens," what it's saying is this: the Egyptians created burdens that were designed to afflict the people. And we know that this affliction, according to Genesis 15:3 or 15:13, is an affliction that would last 430 years. And this would be the increased bondage. And this affliction would be the bondage as a result of the burdens that the Egyptians put upon them. This is the plan for this king to make Egypt great again. The purpose of the Egyptians was to impose severe exactions of tribute and tax. Not only to afflict them, but also to impoverish them. He didn't want to just afflict them. He wanted to break them. He wanted to impoverish them. He wanted to break their spirits, to crush their wills, to destroy and to upend their energy, to stifle their growth. And what he wanted to do is to fulfill the ultimate goal of putting this sort of prodigious and colossal increase of the Israelites in their numbers into check. This is his plan to make Egypt great again. Break the will of the people who are in Egypt who are not Egyptians. Break their will, stifle their energy, make them subject to so much tax and tribute that they cannot pay their bills, impoverish them. This was his goal. Reduce Pharaoh, this new king, he wanted to reduce them to a state of bondage and vassalage. But this state of bondage and vassalage that he was building was designed to reduce Israel into the property of the crown. To basically just make them servants to the crown. That's it for part 7. Part 8 follows next. Be provoked and be persuaded in this story that I called Make Egypt Great Again.